Welcome back to the MCR. My name is Matt, and today I've got Marty with me, a former co-host, a professional teacher. Is that accurate?
Well, I was.
Business owner?
I closed my program about 3 years ago, but I taught for 23 years. I think that's something.
Yep, that's certainly, I don't know that it makes you an expert per se, but it certainly gives you a right to an opinion. So we're going to talk about education, what's wrong with it, what's right with it, what they're teaching, what to do about it. And I'll start off with money. I constantly hear from people, if we just had more money for education. Well, I did a little digging into that. It wasn't easy to find because I think they don't want you to know. But
No,
I saw as high as $26,000 per student in New York State. And on the top end here in Michigan, it's about 13 or 14,000. Now, years ago, I sent my daughters to parochial schools, and I'm sure you had a very similar experience where
sent my kids to Catholic schools, yes.
Where at the time, I think the top was 11,000 for a student, and if they were of a single parent family, they were 13,000. So
yeah.
Now we sent our girls to a parochial school, and it was about $3,500 a year. And they got a top-notch education. The test scores at that school, the graduation rate from high school was extremely high, 99%. And of course, I sent my one daughter to a Catholic high school, which also had a very high percentage of graduations. But it was $3,500 a year versus $11,000. So if it can be done for $3,500 a year, why can't it? Why is it cost $11,000 and the kids are stupid and they can't read and write, and they get a diploma, they can't read?
Well, it's because it's not about the money. It's about the commitment, and that's commitment on the part of the parents, the students, the teachers, the whole 9 yards. And I mean a commitment toward a genuine education, not a commitment toward the 1619 project. Not a commitment toward any sort of indoctrination or propaganda, but a commitment toward a real education that will teach the kids to think for themselves on their own. And you have that in private schools, and you don't have that by and large in public schools. There's going to be exceptions. The rural districts tend to be more conservative.
I'm sure there's some fine teachers out there doing the best they can.
Oh yeah. But
when you're saddled with something like critical race theory, what are you going to do?
Yeah, that's just it. I mean, I think people need to look harder at private education, as you and I did. I know that's difficult because you're being taxed for the public schools, and then you have to pay more money. I didn't get a tax break for all the money I gave Catholic schools. You didn't either. Yep. So it makes it tough, and I think that's part of the scheme on the part of the government, quite frankly, is we're going to take so much of your money for the schools that you're not going to have enough money to invest in private education.
Well, as you know, here in Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer is vehemently opposed to schools of choice, and that's because she's bought and paid for, and I'm not ashamed to say bought and paid for by the teachers' unions.
Yeah, the teachers' unions hold an extraordinary amount of power, and that's another reason we've had the dumbing down, is because unions are for the workers first. Yes. In and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. But they protect workers. And one of the things me old Grandpa Joe used to say was that unions ultimately are for the lowest common denominator.
Absolutely.
Just do the job, by and large, aren't going to lose the job. The evil capitalist isn't going to fire somebody that's doing his job and making him money. It doesn't happen that way. No. So you're protecting the lowest people on the rung. And, the old saw C.S. Lewis, among other people, used it was, the only way to protect everybody, to make everybody equal, is to dumb everybody down.
Right.
And then for teachers,
they try to teach equality in schools, and what they don't teach about equality is that none of us can be better than the worst of us, going to what you just said.
Exactly. And the thing is, we really, as a bit of an aside, we really don't want equality. We want freedom.
Right.
And you're not going to, if you've really got freedom, you're not going to get equality. And we need to understand that, that's going to cause disparities. But if we're adult human beings, we understand those. I mean, I'm never going to be a brain surgeon. Believe me, you don't want me messing around with your brain.
So,
But
so as a
except,
teacher, what were your challenges in the classroom?
well, I got a lot of students who were clearly just barely getting by, and by my evidence, were just being passed along. And then I was in a position of I needed to keep the grades up, because it looked bad on the teachers, the district, the parents would get upset if their kid weren't moved along. So, to be perfectly blunt, now that I'm safe from repercussion, I passed a lot of kids through. I didn't have any option. I could not give them the one-on-one time that they really needed. And then when you consider that by the time I'm getting them, they're typically in 11th and 12th grade, if you can't read by 11th grade when you come to me for an American history class, I can't teach you how to read and do justice to the other 11th graders who can read. Now,
Yeah.
maybe that's not the kid's fault, to be totally fair, but it's a reality that's got to be dealt with. And
Well, I got to believe that life, and I've known
course,
people who were illiterate, but life is hard enough without adding illiteracy to your resume.
yes, it is. Yes, it is. And then, a lot of students are snotty, but they come from poor home environments. I don't want to use that as an excuse, but if we're going to understand the problem, we have to understand that. And of course, that's where the parental involvement and commitment comes in. If they don't really have a stable family home, we could talk all day about the lack of fathers in the home, but even single family homes where it's just mom, you can still get some well-disciplined kids out of that environment.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And
it just depends on how much the parent values education, of course.
Yes, exactly.
Or doesn't value it at all.
Which leads to another thing, in my opinion, I think that would help is that as far as possible, I think not just conservatives, but anybody should look into homeschooling. I mean, to be blunt, it's really not that hard. Not to knock the real good teachers out there, but you, me, either one of our wives, any of our kids, we got 5 kids between us, all 5 of our kids, I think could teach at least through a 6th grade level without any extra education. The subject matter is just not that hard. And then when you get to the higher grades, there's tons of resources online. I believe her name is Kerry, Kerry McDonald. I read her articles through the Intellectual Takeout website, and she's a big proponent of homeschools. And, she's always presenting great resources. I mean, I get it. I couldn't teach a high school chemistry class, but that's when you get in league with other parents who are homeschooling, and you get a parent who can teach that chemistry class. Well, then your kids go to them for the chemistry, and their kids come to me for the history and government. It works.
Yeah. Well, so we're both proponents of doing away with the Department of Education on a federal level.
Absolutely.
I'm not even sure I'm opposed to it, getting rid of it on a state level. I think education needs to be local. I think school boards are far more important than people realize. And I'll tell you, when they have to have the Department of Justice go after people for complaining at school
for being
board
worried
meetings,
about their daughters getting raped in a bathroom that a guy should not be in.
Yeah. And then you're going to be called a terrorist or domestic terrorist. I mean, where do you think it all went wrong? And we don't want to go too much longer because we're getting a little long in the tooth on the video here, but
I think it went wrong at the very beginning, to be honest with you. I'll go all the way back to Thomas Jefferson and the founders wanting university level public education. You don't want government controlling that. You don't want them controlling the thought process. Then it bled down into, I think, Massachusetts in the 1840s was when the first, I'll call them K-12 public schools came up. You don't want government controlling that because you get exactly what you get today. You get
anything that's free isn't generally worth very much.
Exactly.
And the education is no different. How do you feel about universities being sub-state universities? Like, we'll use our own examples here in Michigan. We got University of Michigan, Michigan State, Central, Western, so on, Eastern. How do you feel about them being essentially subsidized by the taxpayer through taxes?
Oh, I'm against that. To be perfectly blunt, Mac, I would probably end public education in all its forms. Because it just doesn't serve a useful purpose, but over time, it makes everybody think the same. And that's whether it's K-12 or university. And university may be the key area to stop it, because those are the people that are being trained, I'll say in air quotes.
We'll call it
And
indoctrination.
go into the classroom and indoctrinate your kids.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no respect for education at any level. And it does kind of start in the universities, because that's where the tentacles spread out, you know, into the lower forms of the public schools. And I mean, if I had my, there'd be no public education at all, quite frankly. You know, one of the things is diversity. They preach diversity, right? But then they don't want diversity of thought. But if everything's private, you're going to get all kinds of diversity of thought. Why is that a bad thing here?
Well, they don't. They say one and do another, of course, because they're
yes, exactly
hypocrites on so many levels. It's, you know, that's a whole other video, I suppose. But thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me today. And
you're welcome.
We'll go ahead and wrap this up now, as we always say on the MCR. Be safe, watch your six, and don't tread on me.